My name is Kelly Collins. I work for IBM, and I'm the Vice President of our Federal Software Division. I'm going to start and kick off our panel focused on the power of data in a cognitive government. We have a panel, we have 3 people. We have another individual he's a retired Army Ranger, so he's going to parachute in here at any moment. He's here, he's just in another session. And I'm going to start to kind of kick it off. So I am a big believer that panels are more fun when they're a little bit more improvisational than theater. So I have a couple of questions that I'm going to go through with the panel. And then we would like to open it up for questions as well. But if you have a burning one, just raise your hand and we will get to you as we can work it in. All right, so let me introduce the panel. And I just saw Bill walking in the back. He's getting mic'd. I'm sorry? I think that was just a hand wave. All righty. So with me, I have Dr. David Carnahan. He is here. He's the Chief Data Scientist and Enterprise Intelligence and Data Solutions Delivery Division for DHA. I also have William Holmes. With me, he's the Director for Data Solutions and the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Compliance and Integration at the IRS. And here comes Mr. Buck as we speak, Bill Buck.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're in good form and good time. He is the CEO of Genesee Corporation and also, as I mentioned, a retired Army Ranger. So welcome, and we'll get it started. My first question I wanted to ask the panel is I wanted them to describe a big data pet rock that they have, that they're trying to solve within their agency. And I will give you an example of mine. I just recently rejoined IBM after 28 years, worked here as a co-op student and out of college, and just came back this year. I came back because I felt that IBM is one of the few companies that is putting significant amount of R&D into cognitive computing and could potentially be the ones that help solve this problem. And it is what I call the confluence of cyber and cognitive. So if I narrate for just a minute, if you think of the typical cyber data that many of us are so familiar with, it's typically traditionally structured data. But there is another side of it, and I heard our keynote speaker from IARPA this morning called it the digital exhaust. The other side of that equation, the digital exhaust of the unstructured side of cyber. So for example, hackers are braggarts. They have a lot of braggadocio. They're also collaborators. And they say things in open source, they say things in dark webs and in the dark nets that get captured as unstructured data that would be very informative if we can easily, through cognitive computing, combine structured and unstructured data in such a way that you start to apply reason over data to create those hidden insights and meaning from the data. So if you think about that from a perspective of attribution, what amazing fine-grained attribution you would have if you could take the unstructured content of what nation-state cyber hackers say to each other, to themselves, in the way that they incriminate each other or take credit for pwning a system, and you knit that together with their structured footprint, you have incredible insights. And truly, it is a challenge in taking unstructured data from whatever métier we are in, whether it's healthcare, whether it's big data analytics in the Department of Defense or open source information, and marrying that up with other structured data gives you what I consider a real killer app. So I'm going to pass first to Bill Holmes to talk about potentially his big data pet rock, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Good morning, everybody. I think that if you think about what the IRS does, even as we sit here, somebody's making a federal tax deposit. Every time an employer makes payroll, they make a deposit with the IRS. With a financial institution, then that goes to the IRS. When you file your tax return, you'd like the money that was put aside and sent in for you to be there so you can get your refund. So the IRS's computing systems are built around a very predictive model because they have to be. You've got 100 and some odd million returns coming in a year for individuals. That then goes up against the information returns, 1099s, 1098s, W-2s, several billion of those a year, and those have to match so that we know whether the return is accurate on its face. And if you think about the type of infrastructure that's required for that type of system, it has to be very predictive. You have to know what's on the tax return. You have to know what's going to be on the 1099. You have to know the exact line item. You have to know what's on the 1098. You have to know what's going to be on the 1040. Then you sort of extrapolate that out to 941s and 940s and 1120s and 1120Fs and the whole line of tax returns that we have. For a system to do the basic matching, it requires a lot of prediction and it requires a lot of stability. Well, if you think about what you've heard them talk about data science, that's sort of the exact opposite of what you want sort of in a data science environment, which is using an iterative process where I'm not really sure where the data is going to take me, but I need to have access to it. I pose a question, I do a cycle, I see what it gives me, I do another question, I do another cycle, I see what it gives me, and ultimately I get to compliance risk. Well, sort of the merging of those two systems is very challenging because the system that's built for one isn't really the system that supports the other. And you sort of see that, I guess, throughout the large financial institutions too. Before the break, we were talking about simple things like know your customer rules, right? It seems like today that you would know every customer in your financial institution, but if you're a bank that's acquired a bank that's acquired a bank that's acquired a bank, and you're the chief compliance officer and you have to certify that you know everybody that's in your system, and then you've got, for more complications, a retail sector and a high wealth sector and the private placement sector. All of those then are different systems, different computers. I think that the challenge, again, so my passion would be, how do we take organizations which are locked for a lot of very good reasons into that predictive, I know what I need in a year and a half, and then you do the development work and then you get it, into the adaptive mode where you can be nimble and quicker and have better access to the data.
Mr. Buck.
Okay, I'm next. I feel like I'm in the shooting gallery. Go! I think that if I was trying to figure out what would be a good thing to do, I would really just focus on everything I don't know. I mean, for me, in the whole of government sort of out here, that's a common resource that would be valuable to everybody. And there's so much happening in the world today that we can keep track of that we couldn't keep track of before. That's what I'd go after. I'd go after the stuff I don't know by basically canvassing all the data that's available and sharing it between the different parts of government. I'll say one more thing about whole of government. New generation warfare for the greatest threat that we have is a whole of government approach. Because for them, they're already at war. And in 20 years, when we're raising hands to say, who's a veteran, everybody in this room will be raising your hand because you're a target. And that's today's world. So that's why it's important to know about what we don't know.
Very good point. Dr. Carnahan.
So I think for me, I had originally had a hard time thinking about what a pet rock would be, but there's so many things that we're involved in. But I think my single, if I were to pin one thing, it would be trying to help the Defense Health Agency to produce and to encourage and support a learning health system. And so with a learning health system, there's really some key components, and these are platforms that we're focused on building in support of the services, and that is you need a information portal, and so we started there. That's where you can leverage all the products that you produced out into a shareable space across all the different across the enterprise. But you also need an analytic bench with all the tools that you need. You also need access to all the data that was mentioned. And then the other space is the data science lab, and that follows the Gartner principles. I actually spent some time on the Coursera Johns Hopkins data science certificate path going through all those courses, and I knew what it took to do this work just by experience of doing it in the off hours. And then whenever I said, well, we need this, we need to do this. And so I started putting together a plan, and when I canvassed out there, I found that Gartner had called them different things, what I was describing, but they were very similar to what it takes to be a premier analytics platform and program. But for me, you need discovery, data discovery, the unknown unknowns. You need research, you need deep analytics, you need clinical decision support at the real time. You need all of that to be kind of a state-of-the-art learning health system. So that's what I want to focus on.
I had a fascinating, just quick conversation at the break after the keynote speaker from IARPA from a lady sitting next to me from NIH, and she said, my role at NIH is to look at healthcare 20 years out from now and to use the power of cognitive computing to be able to assess. We'll have different healthcare categories of, of servicing. If you have you need acute care versus if you have a chronic issue. And acute care, you go to the hospital. Chronic, you get treated at home. And wellness, it's all video portal or what have you. So it's kind of interesting for us to perceive how some of these advances in computing and the cognitive arena are going to affect something that affects us in our daily life. So if I segue to the next question, I wanted to ask the panel what an aha moment that they may have had related to cognitive computing. And I want to narrate the following because I found this very illustrative for me 5 years ago when I worked in government, but also in banking. And I had a senior vice president of a bank say, we did not believe in machine learning. We didn't understand what it would do for our bank. But we had a very interesting experience when we challenged a cognitive computing company. We came to them with a slice of our email. And we shared with them what we look for when we try to protect against insider trading inside of the bank, because we could perceive that the fines were going to start escalating up to hundreds of millions, which they certainly did. They did something sneaky when they did this, and they put 2 people who were already under investigation for insider trading inside of that data plant that they had the company analyze. When the company found 5 people in 2 days, they freaked out. And they had a real aha moment in understanding that, and it was a point, again, that the keynote shared, we can't trust the efficacy of our own brain power. It cannot be matched up against the ability for a machine to go through all of this data, apply reason over it, and pull out things in that data that smell like this. This is what I'm looking for. I joke with people, this is not your daughter's Google. You are not looking for always a finite, discrete answer. You are looking for patterns of information that pull that data out to you so that you, who can't read any faster than our grandfathers did, pull that data out and organize it for you. So that gives you an idea of an aha moment more, and I use the financial community sometimes as a parallel to government. They oftentimes don't have the same scale of data that we have, but they oftentimes are just a little bit in advance of what best practices are that we then adopt in government. So let me go the opposite direction this way, and we'll go from David Carnahan in to an aha moment in your realm.
So I'm going to make this very personal, just so you know kind of what drives my passion. So my dad was recently admitted with renal failure, and so I was talking to the nephrologist, and the thing for me in talking to the nephrologist, I kind of knew what the scenario was. I already knew the diagnosis for my dad, and kind of knew what the expected path would be. I'd read up on it to make sure that there were no new studies and things like that. So whenever I talked to a nephrologist, they want to immediately start dialyzing my father. And so I said, well, what are the indications? And knowing full well there was no indication for dialysis with my dad. Well, whenever he said, well, this creatinine is increasing. I said, well, yeah, but you're treating a number. You're not really treating the patient. So I went into the whole, in med school we learned AEIOU. There's certain acidosis, electrolyte abnormalities, ingestions, intoxicants, and overload, and uremic side effects. So I went through all that and said, does he have any of these? And so then I started listing all his labs and everything. And he said, no, he doesn't have, you're right, he doesn't have any of that. So we'll hold off on the dialysis. You need to know that in today's age, it's about 10 grand a day for dialysis. Now, I didn't oppose that because I opposed it because as a doctor, we're supposed to be thinking about risk-benefit ratios, but I find it very few people are actually doing that. And so when I say there's no benefit, because then I went on and said, well, unless you know of some evidence out there that early dialysis will lead to better outcomes, and he goes, no, there are no studies that show that. I said, okay, well then, so we have no benefit and we have a lot of risk with dialysis. So I want to hold off on that as much as possible. So I had that conversation in the ER. I met the hospitalist later in the day, and he was flustered and frustrated, and it was because the nephrologist hasn't seen your father yet. I keep paging him and all this sort of stuff. I said, well, he saw him. I was in the ER with him. He saw him in the ER. He goes, really? Like, I didn't know this. And I said, yes, I had a conversation with him. And so we talked about that. And then it just hit me that we really need to go to the next level. So why don't electronic health records have video data? Why don't we have video interactions between doctors and patients? How many of you have had the experience where some doctor or provider came in and talked to your family member, and they told you what they said, and you got, after you got that, you're like, I have no clue what they told my family member, right? But what would it look like if you had a video clip of that interaction in the patient portal that your family member gave you permission to view, and you heard exactly what they told them in the video? What would that look like, So, I mean, the other thing is like, the opaqueness of cost. And so I recently read a book called Understanding Healthcare, Value-Based Care, because I'm trying to figure out the impact that's going to have in the military. And my personal side note is it's going to rock the military, but that's a whole nother topic. But so when I was reading this, I was thinking about the opaqueness of healthcare cost. What would it be like if we had a real-time dashboard in the patient's room that listed the thing that they're about to do and the costs associated with that? That family members could then start to ask, is this thing necessary? And now this may put off a lot of people, but here's the reality is our system is broken. And it's like having a real estate agent try to show you a house and not be able to tell you what it's going to cost. Doctors have no clue about the cost, have no clue of the impact this is going to have. And in many cases, it's going to cause financial harm. So, if you look at the reason people file for, bankruptcy and all that, number one reason is healthcare. So we have some real big issues. Another last thing I'll say is, why is it that whenever somebody comes in and they have a chief complaint of chest pain, why don't we know the final discharge diagnosis for the last 1,000 people that came in with that same complaint, show a distribution? Would that be hard? That's not hard. If you have that data and you have the ability to do it quickly, you can actually show, of the last 1,000 people that came in, this is the distribution of the diagnosis. I just think some of these things that are no-brainer type things we do in analytics could really help if it was on the front line in front of providers. So, anyway.
Can I just roll that ahead? I'm thinking about
Pay it
malpractice and insurance and meeting all the requirements and all the questions that you're first asked when you get in there about, do you smoke, or have you had 5 kids, or have you ever run across a dog, or I don't know, whatever else. And I think that whole process could be much more automated, and that's probably somewhere in the promise of what we're talking about. Now, to try to remember what I was going to say before, let me see if I can do that. The topic that we're trying to go at today, this is the senior moment working. What are we focused on today? What was the latest thing that you just asked right now?
Your aha moment.
My
in
aha
cognitive
moment. So
computing.
there it is. That's my aha moment. I have no memory. Yeah. But actually, that's kind of a cool idea, is to be able to have a memory that can progressively and continuously develop with you as you live. I can't tell you how many times my wife has told me, I told you that already. So that would be something. But my real aha moment in terms of this technology in IBM actually happened in a DIA pilot, which unfortunately I can't tell you about. But what I would say is that one of the coolest things about this process for me in terms of learning about this technology is, if you think about a search block, you're inserting the word or the coin or the phrase or whatever, and you're hitting the button and you get the vending machine answer, right? I think what we're talking about here with cognitive computing is something way more sophisticated with that. I'm the coach. I'm going to teach this player how to throw the best ball they ever did. And I get to interact with that process to develop that machine to produce an answer that's going to be helpful to me. So in that particular situation, the aha moment came with the most incredible, valuable military intelligence that came out of the whole thing off a Facebook page. Now, just imagine that. It's all out there floating around right now, and because of the questions that the machine was taught to understand and learn, it was able to produce a result that thousands of analysts have never figured out. Nothing against the analysts, right? That's the power of the machine and the learning that the machine got from the analyst and the people that trained it. End of story.
Yeah, and I will just make mention for anyone in the audience who is in this community. At Defense Intelligence Agency, General Stewart did produce a classified report on 4 sprints that occurred that took cognitive computing to look at certain issues that were germane to that community. It was fascinating, and there were several aha moments, which always occurs with us when we take a corpus of information like this and we interrogate it in a different manner. And I'll just narrate quickly. Oftentimes, the impediment to that getting adopted within certain areas where they have very, very sophisticated analytic core was that if you think of a John Henry competition, oftentimes analysts have a 14-page Boolean logic indicator query that their predecessor did, and if they change it, it's very brittle, and they're concerned it's going to break and it doesn't bring back all the information that they typically want to look at and read. And what we do often is then challenge them to say, do it your way, and then let us show you what kind of data comes back if we do a cognitive interrogation of the same data set. And that is a fascinating exercise, often because it almost always typically brings back a delta of information that they would have missed, that they would actually cop to that they miss. So that is something that if there are individuals in this room that appeals to, those are the type of exercises that we do when we try to prove out the merits of applying cognitive principles to your data. We pass back.
So I think that I have 2. One is a reflection of the other. Why do you go to a doctor? You go to a doctor because, in theory, they know more than you know about the ailment that you have, right? And the analysis he just described, which was, wouldn't it be easy to take the last 1,000 people that have come in with that similar condition and apply some analytics to it to come up with the most likely treatment to that, right? In theory, that's what the doctor does. That's why they go through medical school and why they go through internships and why they specialize, so they can understand at a deeper level. Well, if you think about what that is, why do you go to an attorney? Well, I go to an attorney because I want somebody who knows the law and knows the process, right? We are beginning to commoditize the high-level trades now through information technology. And if you think about it, it's sort of like the Industrial Revolution did for the worker, right? I no longer need to have 50 people assemble this car because I've got robots. Well, if you take that to the next level, why do I need to have a staff of attorneys to research tax code? Or why do I need to have a staff of attorneys to research what the most likely progression of this case is if I've got access to the case data and I've got access to the tendencies of the trial judges, right? I mean, I can immediately pick the most favorable approach and get it in front of the most favorable judge and get the most favorable verdict. And I don't really need an attorney for that. I mean, somebody needs to go to the court that's, got a JD and can practice in front of the court. But all the work behind the scenes, that's automated. And so that we're really beginning, if you think about where we're taking this, we're commoditized. I don't want an analyst's opinion. I want to know the fact pattern, right? I don't really want to know my doctor's opinion. I want to know in a very clinical way, in a very crisp way, what the best path forward is. Not what you feel the best path forward is. I want to know what the best path forward is, right? Which leads me to the next aha moment, which is there's a huge disconnect between what's possible and what's doable. And you're really starting to see that bump a little bit now, because the doctor would say, no machine can ever do what I do, right? And the attorney's going to say, there's no machine can ever do what I do. And you can go down through the skilled trades and you can say, everybody's going to say, there's no way that they could ever do what I do. And so then that leads to your next problem, right? Because who runs the organizations?
Can I answer that?
Yes.
All right. So first of all, I affirm what you just said. There are law firms that are hiring or buying licenses for IC Watson, or for Watson, sorry, not IC Watson, instead of hiring a first-year associate, because they can work their way through the database of case law and get out answers that are relevant to what skilled practitioners need to be able to do what they do, right? So the next step in my mind is that that's a great thing, because now this guy can spend more time doing what he's good at. So I don't have a problem with job displacement or knowledge displacement or all that kind of stuff, because it's just raising the bar for the guys that know what they're supposed to be doing in the long run.
Yeah, let me add on to that too, because I've heard that. So there's a couple things. I don't think we're at the point where AI is going to be sophisticated enough to replace human judgment. So I just want to be clear on that. I think it can make recommendations based on the data, but I can tell you, sitting in the room, sometimes the patient's lying to you, so you're getting data that's not correct. But you can tell by their body language. So there's some things about that. I think that will evolve over time. I'm not going to say it won't ever happen, but the way I think of this is just allowing us to have this collaborative approach that was talked about earlier, where it's like the co-pilot situation, where basically it's this information gets to them in a very meaningful way, allows them to take that next level, like you said. I think there's going to be a lot of people fearful of this, but this would actually help in some areas in medicine where there are shortages in terms of people. What if your nurse practitioner had this information that maybe they haven't been trained at the level that the physician is in that particular area, or a physician assistant. So when you're in front of those folks and their information is supplemented from a technology like this, that would even potentially make them even stronger in terms of knowing what they need to know to take care of you. So there's going to be all sorts of scenarios that I think. But my thing is this: when I was in the ER with my dad and the nephrologist, and by the way, my dad is doing well. Never had dialysis the whole time, even though it would have been about $100,000 had they started on the first day like that. And he never needed dialysis and discharged, and his creatinine was fine. So. But the reality is, as I was down there with the ER, I got a notification on my cell phone that somebody was at my door ringing my doorbell. So that was that aha moment where I was like, wow, they need something like this in the ER, where the video interaction then prompts a notification to the doctor saying, hey, the nephrologist has seen your dad. Whether they watch the video or not, at least they know that box has been checked. So that's the kind of things I think there's a lot of room where we could allow technology to empower folks doing their job to do it better.
Yep. And so it's good we're all agreeing. But I think that
You're from the IRS. I'm not agreeing.
I get that a lot. But if you think about my premise, which is there's a difference between what is possible and what you can actually do. To go back to your medical example, right? If you go to your general practitioner who then refers you to somebody in the same system, I still got to fill out the paperwork when I get there, right? They have all the paperwork. And is the technology there? I mean, even though they're in the same medical system, right? Why? Because that particular doctor's attorney said you better get an original signature, right? And so I go and now I fill it out and I hand it. Now there's another duplicate record that I've got, which gets scanned in to match the other duplicate record that I've got. And then if there's another referral and I go to the office, what's the first thing they ask me to do? Fill out the paper. Same system. So you step back and you say in the abstract, right? In the abstract, a single entry point into the medical system of this particular hospital, and I do it once and I'm done. In the real world, it just ain't like that. And I think that what you're going to see is, again, you're going to begin to see some collisions between, again, what's possible with technology and what the attorneys think you should do. What's possible with technology and what data you can actually share. I mean, it's interesting when you describe the fact that, one government, everybody's sharing everything. Well, I'm with the IRS, and we're covered by IRC 6103, which means if we touch it, it can't get out of the IRS, right? There's a whole legal framework around how the data actually gets distributed because taxpayers have a right to privacy. We're very jealous about judging that. Well, that right there is a problem. And then you overlay that treaty provisions, right? We get data coming in from other countries. Treaty provisions are separate and above. It makes it very complicated to share data. So again, in the abstract, it makes perfect sense. In the real world, where you've got all these constraints, it makes it extraordinarily challenging. And I guess I don't have a lot of experience with the defense sector, but it makes it very challenging.
Well, the unfortunate thing about the defense sector is the other guys are trying to kill us.
Yep.
So they're not following the same rules.
Yep.
But
all right, and actually, I'm actually just going to scan around and allow, if you have any questions, be sure to give a little sign of your hand. We're going to go on with one more question here. Just want to make sure you're prepared if you have any thoughts in your mind. So, well, actually, we have one right here. Please. I'm sorry? Well, no, we have one now. Let's just do a quick one, and we'll go right back into it.
I'm Missy Words. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. I was at a session a couple of weeks ago where the discussion was about using AI and let the machine decide where to shoot, who to shoot, when to shoot. It made me very scared.
Well, it's going to happen. I can tell you right now. And the bad guys are going to do it first. And that's going to be a real problem for us if we don't get our act together. Because they don't care about casualties. They don't care if they're civilian or military. They just want to win, right? So, sorry for that answer, but that's what we're up against.
All right, and this is a very inelegant segue because, oh, I'm sorry. Did not see that.
I'm interested in the ability of federal agencies to share data with each other when they're nervous about it. And my favorite example is where the IRS and the Department of Education share data to be able to say, for kids who people, young adults who graduated 10 years ago from college X, the IRS knows what their current income is, federal student aid knows that they went to college X and that they graduated in such and such a year because of the student loans, and the federal government's able to strip out the personally identifiable information and say, here's the typical income in comparison to the college cost for any college in the country. And I realized that was a big challenge, getting both sides comfortable in sharing data, but I can see a lot of other sorts of applications for that. And so my question is, how do you all see agencies working together to share data, nevertheless eventually stripping out the personally identifiable information? But you have to have that PII in order to match up the data from the different agencies. Do you see that as something promising, and how would you see going forward with something like that?
So I'll start us. I think this, just to formally say this, I think that's your segues into your next question, which is some of the barriers and challenges probably down the road. But I think the reality is that I can tell you from the Department of Defense, one of the big things we're doing is trying to consolidate down our data. We have data islands everywhere, and depending on whose rice bowl it is and how influential they are with certain leaders, they can make it very difficult to share that information, even though there's a reason to do that. What I find a lot of times is the reason why people don't want to necessarily share data is because of fears and concerns about privacy and security, but also because, why people in our system are trying to create all these data islands is because they have their favorite analytic tool that they use, and we don't have one platform available for people to use their favorite analytic tool. So they create this whole data ecosystem so they can put their analytic tool on there and use the expertise they have to answer the questions. We gotta take a big picture approach to this, and we have to start thinking about taking those steps. So what I tell leaders all the time that come to me and want to talk about AI is I tell them, there is no AI, so it's like football. You can't do a flea flicker unless you can block, okay? If you can't block the people coming in, the flea flicker will never work. And for those non-football folks, all that means is you can't be fancy if you're not doing the basics. And so for us, data management is a basic. And so how do we share the data? I think what we do is we have to set up the data governance agreements, and that's probably that long pole in the tent. But I think the other thing is we have to leverage kind of modern technology, the way people are doing it. We have to use APIs, we have to API strategy, we have to use standards. And a good model for this I see is Cerner. We're working to roll out and implement a commercial off-the-shelf electronic health record. In Cerner, they've done something very smart, in my opinion, is they created this, quote, open community, and they said you can put apps into our electronic health record if you use these technologies and these standards. And so that allows people that are not Cerner to actually use some of the data that's in Cerner through an API to then create an app that then others can share and use in that ecosystem. And so as a federal government, I think we have to come up with an API strategy. We have to continue to be serious about a standard, and FHIR seems to be taking a lot of momentum. And then I think what we have to do is we have to get in the cloud. So for me, the biggest barrier I would like to see destroyed is the government's hesitancy to go to the cloud. It's a two-edged sword, and so cyber, we all know just recently with what happened that it's kind of important that we're doing this right. So to connect all the data helps us solve problems, but it also is now a huge risk on the other side. We've made it very easy for people to get in that are maybe not in our best interest to get in there and do what they want to do. So anyway, it's just, I've seen people drag their feet. I've been working on this initiative for cloud for 2.5 years, and it's taken forever, and it makes no sense to me. So we got to get to the cloud before we can start really seriously talking about AI.
So I would say that from my perspective, we have to first and foremost protect people's data, right? We have to protect their right to privacy. We have to make sure that they've got confidence that if they gave us information, that it's used for the purpose they gave it to us for. And so there's a process in place where government agencies can request access to other agencies' data. That process has to be followed, because if the taxpayers of the United States lose confidence in the ability to protect their data, that's a problem for everybody. And so I think that, going back to my original thing, is it possible to sort of move to the cloud for all government data? It is possible. It is possible. Is it probable? No. Because, again, you want your tax data protected, right? And you want your tax data protected, and you want to know that it's not going to be misused, and you want to know that if somebody's looking at your records, that there's an audit trail there, that they're doing it only for official purposes, that it's being done for the right reasons, by the right person, with the right motivations. And I know it's very easy to say, well, for the common good, well, you know what, I'm an individual, and I don't want people looking at my stuff if they don't have a right to look at my stuff, right? And so we have to protect it, and so it's a challenge. It's going to be a real challenge for the government. And I can tell you that I do a lot of work in the international space. And it's a challenge internationally too, because if you start to get to some of the other jurisdictions, their right to privacy laws say it'll be housed in a server physically located within my jurisdiction. Well, how are you going to do cloud computing like that? And so again, it's cloud computing. I've got friends of mine who work in other agencies. They use some of the big service providers, infinitely scalable, pay for it when you need it, don't pay for it when you don't. That's fantastic. But they don't have the sort of privacy restrictions on the kind of work they're doing that other agencies do. And walking that line, making sure that you're maximizing your analytic potential while not forgetting about the fact that you are bound to protect people's information is a challenge. Because when this gentleman says, well, they're coming at us, right? Well, I don't want them coming to my house, right? But I also know that you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, and you have to protect people's right to privacy. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
There's another side to citizenship besides just gaining benefit, right? That's part of voting. That's part of why we pay taxes. That's part of our participation in the broader society. I'm not, they call it civil servant for a reason. So we have to think about, I think, when we're in government, about the people that we're there to serve and the government that we're part of. On the other hand, citizens have a responsibility to the country, and in some ways to the responsibility to you to be able to do your job. So, maybe it's all that's not about privacy. It might just be about opting in sometimes. You want that student loan? Then you're going to opt in to make sure that you tell us how much money you're making every year or whatever it is. I mean, there's got to be a trade-off there between the citizens that are getting the benefit and the government that's providing it.
I do want to say that I know we agreed earlier, but I completely disagree with what was just said about the cloud, because people assume that the cloud is a less secure solution, and in reality, in my experience and what I've learned, is it's a more secure solution if it's done correctly. It's really about the agreements. I can give you a perfect example. CDC, my first call was the most painful experience I've ever had trying to get death data from the CDC for the DoD to be able to do population health and to do it well. We don't want to call people who have lost family members. That's a bad interaction, and it's not good for them. And so my thing is that we just wanted death data. Whose privacy is that? If you look at in terms of safe harbor and kind of the research requirements, what we're trying to get is death certificate data so we can understand what's happened to this individual, and then take those individuals out of our registry so we're not calling them. Well, it was painful. It was one of the most difficult conversations I've had, until at the end I kept saying, are you sure there's not another way we can go about this? Well, there is this one side project, as a matter of fact sort of statement. Well, we called, and that person was pleasant. But that's not the way this should be. And yeah, people have processes, but they make it painful. And I think we have a lot of work to do in this space to make it easier for people to get access to information that's going to help us.
Right, I'm with him. You know, it's easy to keep track of what you have, right? It's just like, I got it, it's all under control, no problem. It's a whole other thing to innovate. And the ability to innovate really falls outside of the domain of the government usually. So, because your job is to keep everything moving along like it's supposed to. I would definitely rely on outside providers to provide cloud computing resources to facilitate what I'm trying to do. The technology moves too fast. The security issues are too extreme. The storage issues are too complex. The amount of data that is growing every day, why waste your time worrying about things like that? There's plenty of people that provide those services. Make them compete for your business. Focus on what's important and deliver what you're supposed to be delivering to your constituency, whether it's medicine or taxes or whatever. And by the way, I would really like to see these guys stop beating the head on people on compliance and try to get people to figure out how to participate. You know, like, if you get your return in faster, we'll give you $100 off. Or if you do this and you give us that information, you don't have to report for 6 more months or something. It's a pain in the neck to do all that stuff. Yeah.
I'm
So,
just
real
going
quick,
to do a quick, okay.
Real quick.
Absolutely.
So I agree with these two guys. And what I mean by that is you didn't hear me say that cloud computing was less safe. I'm 100% agreement with that. Infinitely scalable, safe. My example was if I'm dealing with a jurisdiction that has a privacy law that requires a server to be physically located in their jurisdiction, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And that was my point earlier, where what you're beginning to see, I think to point 2, was you're going to begin to see the legal side banging up against the technology side. And it's going to happen all over the place. It's going to happen when you walk in the doctor's office and some attorney somewhere demands that you get another physical signature on it in spite of the fact you've already got the data in your system. When you've got a jurisdiction that says you have to have a server located physically within the borders of my country, I mean, you're juiced. You are not going to do cloud computing in that environment, right? And so again, the discussion here really sort of gets back to my initial point, which is you're going to begin to see this tension. You're going to see the tension between privacy and data access. You're going to begin to see the tension between what is possible from a technology perspective and what is legally possible. Now, can you change laws? Absolutely. I don't do that. None of us do either. So you got to sort of just be aware of that because, again, you might want to exchange data, but you also don't want to be the one sitting there when somebody comes in your office and Mirandizes you, right? Because you misused the data. You don't want that. And so you got to be careful, and you got to make sure that you're deliberate, you're following all the rules and all the laws, even as you try to innovate.
Smarter, better, faster.
Yeah.
Even as you try to innovate.
I do want to go on the record and say that the IRS guy was complaining about filling out multiple forms.
Can we get a microphone right here? Oh, we have a question back here, all right, and then we have one up front.
Hi, Matt Nice with DHHS from Montgomery County. So I see lots of big names and big budgets and big staffs, and that's great. How does a modest government organization that has already eliminated all of its islands of data utilize the cognitive computing that you're talking about in a way that we can show some victories that investment's worthwhile without giving me sort of a kind of a pat answer of, well, it'll save you millions more if you spend hundreds of thousands. What's our first step to start utilizing your cloud computing or your cognitive approaches with EHR data and with unified case management data that's all in one massive system that we already have? Where do I start?
I could try to answer
Well-
that, yeah. You know, first of all, pick your battle. Find something that's really important to you that you can focus on. It's always a mess when you try to do too much stuff, right? Pick one thing that you can focus on, figure out how to get the data that you need to answer that question, and then focus on that. All this stuff about machine learning, remember, just a real quick thing, is algorithm, and algorithm is just, by definition, a step-by-step set of instructions to solve a problem, right? It's an opinion of 3 guys about something, right? When you write the code to do that, it's a software developer who's writing code that is also an art, right? It's also an opinion. You put 6 software developers in a room, they're all going to do something different. Compiling code. Who wrote the compiler? What are you compiling that code for? So the machine can learn it. They're all going to be different outputs. Again, it's not we're not devoiding ourselves of humanity by using machines. I'm getting way off track. Pick something that's really important to you that you can focus on and deliver that as a use case and a proof point to go after your chain of command budget approval authority and say, see the results that we produced out of this? Let's do it again bigger.
And Dr. Carnahan, do you have a comment
I
with the
completely
focus on
agree.
EHR?
Yeah, Tom Davenport, International Institute of Analytics, Harvard guy, actually talks about that in his book, Analytics at Work. Pick something that is like the pain point. Something that I think it's a very good idea is pick the painful thing and see if you can apply a machine learning approach to that to then demonstrate the return on investment. And then you'll get more buy-in because you've helped solve a difficult problem.
There we go, question up front.
Ben Lowson, Navy staff. This is for Bill Holmes. Why don't you fill out our taxes for us, and we'll tell you if you got it wrong. It's not my idea, but it's a good one.
Trust me, you don't want me personally doing it.
But your machines are already doing it anyway, so why don't you just send us what you
You know,
do?
it's an interesting question. It's one that's, I guess, a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion here because that's, we have a legal framework that we're operating within. I really don't have a good answer to that other than it's not the current law. So,
Lobbyist.
We exist
Can
in a
we,
system
can we
that is.
canvass any other latent questions out there? We have one right in the middle.
There's a great NPR story about someone who was trying to do exactly what he was talking about. I don't know if you heard that story, but I recommend that. There was a guy who made this his life mission, and he almost got there, but it ended up that there was a very large tax company that makes a lot of money off of helping you fill out your taxes that their lobbyists really kind of help
Is that
squash
H&R
that.
Block?
No.
Because
I'm not gonna
H&R
name a
Block
name.
has a Watson application.
Hi.
Infomercial, yes, please.
Could you share with us some of the real quick success stories of government agencies using the cognitive computing to derive benefits?
Gentlemen, shall I ask you first?
It's going to be probably an intelligence agency or those three-letter organizations because they are in the cloud and they are using, but for most of us that aren't in the cloud, I can't really give you a lot of great, I could talk about some machine learning projects, but it's going to be on limited scope. So I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, let me take that if I can. So I will, in an unclassified version, I'll give you one example because I think it's topical and it's quite interesting. So in social media, we read a lot about, I'll use the term, the rise of Russian trolls. And Russian trolls were a cybersecurity focus to create positive Twitter or positive social media commentary on presidential candidates in the US. So part of some of the analysis that has been done cognitively is to look and collect social media data to see whether or not it looks like it may be coming from a good old-fashioned typical disinformation campaign. So data like that has been analyzed with a kind of a cognitive overlay to be able to pull out and look at the veracity of that information. Very similar parallels that occur in the financial community where people look at trending and what their informants in the markets come back with, whether they're trending with, with the market, against the market, et cetera, and whether they're giving them good data. Of interest, I would share with you that what I have been impressed with at IBM in my very short time here is that IBM is trying to imbue cognitive principles into a lot of the technologies that we provide. So I'll just narrate one, for example, near and dear to my heart on that confluence of cyber and cognitive. We have a SIM service, it's called QRadar, that we've created an open source corpus of information about cyber activities, some on cyber actors, some on issues that would occur if you were an analyst in a security operations center and you ran up against a malware hash that looked like it might be a unique 0-day in the wild, and you are a small organization, you don't have a lot of other resources to rely upon, you use this cognitive service, almost a SIM as a service, or a SOC analyst in a box, if you will, to be able to query that corpus of data that has been collected by thousands of inputs from different researchers around the world, 66,000 different researchers, to be able to query or interrogate that corpus to find out data that would help you deal with a very current situation, as one example. My boss, Sam Gordy, narrated this morning on some predictive maintenance that we're doing with the Army Stryker vehicles to be able to show when potentially a system is going to have a problem so that you can get on it. So not only are we working with our customers with their data to try to build the sort of assemblage underneath of algorithms that go against that data to reveal those very interesting hidden insights, the unknown unknowns, et cetera. But we're also taking that technology and putting it into some of our commodity products. We have a product called AppScan, and there is a requirement in the government to do automated source code analysis of technologies, particularly in the defense area or weapon systems, to make sure we take vulnerabilities out so that our enemies can't steal our IP. And we put cognitive capabilities into that system in the automation of looking at your source code. So for us, cognitive will be imbued in almost everything we do. We think it will be our carrot as we create our cloud infrastructures, that we will be offering a cognitive cloud. That will be one of our big differentiators in our marketplace. So hopefully that gives you a little bit in the defense, IC, and civilian market, and also what we're doing with our own cloud, with our own technologies.
So can I just add a little to that, Kelly?
I love this panel. You just don't have to prod
are
them.
we good or what? Huh? Okay, so coming back to that question there, specifically exactly what Kelly said, just look up Columbia Chemical hoax, right? That was planted by Russian trolls. That's went all over the news media, including the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, or all the news that fits will print. And so it's out there. And I think fake news, which has become a misnomer for a lot of other baloney, really started out because that was effectively being done by people that were trying to, encourage us to lose our confidence in our government and our democracy.
All right.
Nice point to end on. Our democratic
Get
principles.
get confidence, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Enjoyed this panel, gentlemen.
That's great.
Thanks, all.
Hey, really good.
Thank you, man.
Nice meeting you too.